She grew up in a small town where the streets were quiet and the houses were close together. The sun would rise slowly over the rooftops, and the soft golden light would fall across the dusty windows of her home. Her family's house was not large, and the furniture was worn from years of use, but it was full of warmth and laughter. There was a small room at the end of the hallway where an old piano stood. It was scratched and chipped in places, and the keys were not as smooth as they used to be. But to her, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. From a very young age, she felt a pull toward the piano. While other children were running in the streets or playing with toys, she would sit by the piano for hours, letting her fingers explore the keys. At first, it was random, pressing notes without knowing what they would sound like. Sometimes the sounds were harsh and clashing, and other times they were soft and sweet. And those moments made her heart flutter with excitement. There was something magical in the way sound could become music, and she wanted to understand it all. Her family noticed her interest and tried to help as much as they could. They could not afford formal lessons, but they borrowed books from the library, hoping she could learn on her own. She followed the instructions in the books, learning the basics, scales, simple songs, and exercises. Her fingers grew stronger, and her understanding of music grew slowly but steadily. Teachers in her town would sometimes visit and watch her play. They would smile politely and tell her to focus on simple tunes, to perfect the basics before trying anything more complicated. She listened and obeyed, even though inside her, a storm of ideas and melodies was building. She often sat in her small room, practicing the simple pieces she was told to play. She could see the patterns, the notes lined up neatly on the page, but her mind was elsewhere. She imagined how each tune could become something more. How a few changes here and there could make the music soar. She tried quietly at first, adding little touches, a slight pause, a softer note, a louder key, just to see what it would feel like. Her parents would sometimes peek into the room, smiling at her concentration, not knowing the wonders she was creating inside her head. School was not always easy for her. She was quiet and often lost in thought. While other children played games or shared stories about their day, she would hum little melodies under her breath or tap out rhythms on her desk. Sometimes teachers would scold her for not paying attention, but she could not help it. The music in her mind demanded to be heard, and her fingers itched to bring it to life. She longed for a moment when she could share it fully with someone, when someone would understand the fire that burned inside her. She discovered that the piano could be a friend. When she was sad, her fingers would wander across the keys, creating notes that reflected her feelings. When she was happy, her hands would fly, striking keys in bursts of excitement. She learned to listen carefully to every sound she made, to feel the vibration of each note and how it changed with pressure and speed. Over time, she developed a sense of timing, rhythm, and harmony that went beyond what she had learned from books. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of herself. Even with all this, there were moments of frustration. Sometimes her hands could not reach the notes she imagined, or she would make a mistake that ruined the melody she had in mind. She would sigh deeply, her small hands hovering above the keys, trying to figure out where she went wrong. But she never gave up. Each mistake was a lesson, and she would try again, sometimes for hours, until she felt she had captured a piece of the music in her mind. One afternoon, a teacher came to visit. She was a kind woman with gentle eyes and a voice that could soothe even the most nervous student. The teacher asked her to play a simple tune, something short and easy to read. The girl sat down and played carefully, following the notes as they were written. Her fingers moved gracefully, touching each key with precision. The teacher nodded and smiled, saying that she was improving and that she should continue practicing the basics. But as soon as the teacher left, the girl could not resist the urge to add something more. She began to explore the tune, letting her fingers wander, adding small flourishes and changes. The notes that were once simple now carried emotion, depth, and a story that seemed to flow from her very soul. She realized something important that day. Music was not just about following instructions. It was about expression. She could take something simple and make it beautiful, something ordinary and make it extraordinary. The thought filled her with both excitement and nervousness. What if someone did not understand her? What if they thought she was wrong? But the music felt right in her heart, and that was what mattered. As the days went by, she spent more time exploring melodies that were not in any book. She would close her eyes and imagine stories, each note telling a part of the tale. Sometimes it was a story of adventure, with fast, lively notes racing across the keys. Other times it was a story of love or loss, with slow, lingering sounds that made her feel as though she were speaking directly to someone's heart. Each day brought new discoveries, new challenges, and new joys. Her parents began to notice the change. They saw how focused she was, how she would spend hours at the piano without complaining or becoming bored. They began to understand that this was not a passing interest but a deep, abiding passion. They could not give her everything she wanted, but they supported her in the ways they could. Sometimes they would bring her small treats or let her stay up a little later to practice. They encouraged her gently, proud of her dedication and perseverance. The girl also began to notice the power of music over others. When she played for her family, even her younger siblings would stop their games and listen. They would lean against the doorway, eyes wide, captivated by the sounds flowing from the piano. She saw the emotions that music could stir: joy, sadness, excitement, comfort. The realization made her want to create even more, to reach people through her melodies, to tell stories that could not be expressed in words alone. She was not without challenges. There were times when she felt discouraged, when the piano seemed too difficult, when her fingers felt clumsy, or the melodies in her mind felt impossible to capture. But she learned to push through, to be patient with herself. She discovered that persistence was as important as talent, that every hour of practice, every mistake, and every small success contributed to the growth of her skill and the depth of her expression. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and painted the room with shades of orange and pink, she sat at the piano and closed her eyes. She began to play a simple tune she had learned long ago. At first, it was careful and precise, just as she had been taught. Then, slowly, almost without thinking, her fingers began to explore, to add new notes, new rhythms, new feelings. The music swelled and softened, rose and fell, carrying with it the story of her heart and mind. She felt alive, completely absorbed in the flow of creation. In that moment, she understood something profound. The piano was more than an instrument, more than a collection of keys and strings. It was a doorway to another world, a world where she could express herself freely and fully. It was where she could transform simple tunes into masterpieces, where she could discover not just the power of music but the power within herself. She continued to practice every day, not because anyone demanded it, but because it was a part of her, a part of who she was becoming. The simple tunes she was once told to play became the foundation upon which she built her own voice. Each practice session, each experiment, each small success brought her closer to the moment when she would finally share her music with the world, in all its beauty and originality. And so, in the quiet town with its dusty streets and worn houses, in a small room with an old piano, a young girl quietly began her journey. She was told to play simple tunes, but inside her, a masterpiece was waiting to emerge. Little did she know, the music she would create would one day astonish everyone who heard it, a reflection of her talent, her courage, and the deep, unshakable passion that burned within her heart. One day, a notice arrived at her small school about a local recital. It was not a big event, just a chance for students to play in front of a few teachers and families. Her friends were excited about performing songs they had practiced for weeks, but she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had spent so much time exploring melodies in her room, experimenting with the piano, and now the chance to play in front of others made her heart beat faster. Her teacher approached her quietly and suggested she play a simple tune, something that everyone could recognize and follow easily. She nodded and agreed, though a small part of her wanted to do something more. She spent the next few days practicing, making sure she could play the requested tune perfectly. She watched her fingers carefully, listening to each note and correcting small mistakes. Even though it was a simple tune, she played it with care and precision, determined to show her best performance. When the day of the recital arrived, the hall was modest but filled with quiet excitement. Families and students gathered, and the air buzzed with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the piano keys under her fingers as she sat down. The room seemed larger than it had in her imagination, and the faces in the audience blurred together. She took a deep breath and began to play this simple tune, each note clear and steady. At first, she played exactly as instructed, careful not to add anything extra. But as she continued, she felt a familiar pull, the urge to explore beyond the notes on the page. She started to add small variations, softening some notes, holding others a little longer, letting her fingers wander slightly off the expected pattern. The tune began to change, flowing in ways that surprised even her. Her hands seemed to move on their own, responding to the music inside her head rather than the printed notes. Each key she pressed became part of a larger story, a story that she had never shared with anyone before. The audience noticed the subtle changes. Some leaned forward, curious about the unexpected flourishes. Others exchanged quiet whispers, amazed at the depth of feeling in a tune they had known as simple. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She wondered if she was doing something wrong, breaking the rules she had been taught. But deep inside, she knew this was right. This was her music, her voice finally breaking free. As the tune reached its gentle conclusion, she paused and looked up. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that makes every heartbeat feel loud. Then, slowly, the applause began, soft at first and then growing stronger. She felt a rush of relief and joy. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her heart was light. For the first time, she realized that her music could move people, that it could touch their hearts in a way words could not. After the recital, a few teachers approached her, praising her skill and creativity. One older teacher, who had been quiet during her performance, smiled warmly and said that she had a rare talent. The girl felt a mixture of pride and humility. She knew that she had only just begun, that there was so much more to learn and explore. But the encouragement gave her confidence. She began to understand that the music inside her was not something to hide, but something to share with the world. Returning home, she could hardly wait to sit at the piano again. She replayed the tune from the recital in her mind, remembering the emotions she had felt and the responses of the audience. She tried to recreate it, to understand how the small changes she had made had transformed the simple melody into something alive and moving. She experimented with different variations, testing how subtle shifts in timing or volume could change the feeling of a piece. Each experiment brought new discoveries, new excitement, and a deeper connection to her music. Her parents noticed her renewed energy. She would stay at the piano for hours, sometimes late into the night, her face glowing with focus and determination. They admired her dedication, sensing that something special was unfolding. They could not always understand the complexity of what she was doing, but they could see the joy and passion in her eyes. They supported her in small ways, offering encouragement and making sure she had time to practice without interruptions. Word about her performance spread slowly at first. Friends and neighbors who had attended the recital mentioned her playing to others, praising her talent and creativity. Some students in her school began to look at her with a new sense of respect, realizing that she was not just good at following instructions, but capable of creating something original. Though she did not seek attention, she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her music could inspire others, even in small ways. She also began to notice how music could express things that words could not. Sometimes she was nervous or upset, and the piano became a place to release those emotions. She would play with intensity, letting each note carry her feelings. Other times, she felt happiness or excitement, and her music became lively and bright, filling the room with energy. Each experience deepened her understanding of the piano, teaching her that music was not only about technique, but also about emotion and connection. One afternoon, as she practiced, she heard a familiar melody in her mind, a tune she had not thought of for weeks. She began to play, but this time, she did not stick to the notes she remembered. She allowed her fingers to explore, to follow the emotions that rose naturally. The melody grew, expanding into a flowing piece that seemed to have a life of its own. She played with abandon, letting the music take her where it wanted to go. By the time she stopped, she was breathless, amazed at what she had created. It was no longer just a simple tune. It was a story, a reflection of her thoughts and feelings. Encouraged by these discoveries, she began to practice more boldly. She experimented with rhythms, harmonies, and dynamics, pushing the boundaries of what she had learned from books and teachers. She discovered that even small changes could dramatically alter the mood and impact of a piece. Each day brought new challenges, new surprises, and new lessons. She learned patience, perseverance, and the importance of listening deeply to the music she created. As her skills grew, she faced moments of doubt. Sometimes, the music in her head was too complex, too ambitious, and she struggled to translate it to the piano. She would play a section over and over, frustrated when it did not match her vision. But she learned to be patient with herself, to approach each problem with curiosity rather than fear. She began to see mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities to learn, to explore new possibilities, and to deepen her understanding of her own abilities. She also began to think about the impact of her music on others. She wanted to create pieces that could make people feel, think, and dream. She imagined audiences listening and being moved by the melodies she had spent hours perfecting. This vision gave her purpose and motivation, inspiring her to continue exploring and developing her talent. One day, she was asked to perform again at another small event. This time, she felt less nervous and more ready to express herself. She began with a simple tune, just as she had been instructed, but as she played, she allowed herself to explore, adding variations and embellishments that reflected her feelings and creativity. The audience responded with quiet awe, and when she finished, the applause was louder than before. She felt a sense of accomplishment and joy, knowing that her music had touched others. Returning home that evening, she sat at the piano and reflected on her journey. She remembered the first time she had touched the keys, the early days of simple practice, and the moments of discovery that had brought her to this point. She realized that each step, no matter how small, had been important. Each lesson, each practice session, each performance had shaped her into a musician capable of expressing herself fully and freely. She knew that this was only the beginning. There were still countless melodies to explore, techniques to master, and emotions to express. But she also understood that the music within her was powerful, unique, and ready to be shared. The simple tunes she had once been asked to play were no longer constraints. They were the foundation upon which she could build her own masterpieces. With each note, she continued to grow, to discover, and to transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. After her second performance, she began spending even more time at the piano, exploring melodies that had been swirling in her mind for months. She started to understand that music was not just a collection of notes, but a language capable of expressing thoughts and emotions that words could never reach. Each day, she would sit for hours, trying new patterns, rhythms, and harmonies, sometimes recording them in a small notebook she kept beside the piano. She called these her hidden pieces, fragments of music that she created just for herself before the world could hear them. The more she experimented, the more she noticed how her understanding of sound deepened. She began to recognize subtleties in tone, the way a single note could evoke different feelings depending on how it was played. She learned that slowing down a simple passage could make it more dramatic, while quickening a sequence could bring excitement and energy. The piano no longer felt like a tool to follow instructions, but an instrument through which she could breathe life into her ideas. One afternoon, while playing a familiar tune she had practiced countless times, her mind wandered. Without realizing it, she began to improvise, stretching the melody in unexpected ways. Her hands moved quickly yet precisely, weaving notes together like threads in a tapestry. When she finally stopped, she leaned back, her chest rising and falling with exhilaration. She knew she had created something special, a piece that felt alive, unlike anything she had played before. Encouraged by this, she began preparing a more daring performance for the next school event. This time, she wanted to do more than just play a tune with small variations. She wanted to create a full piece, a story and sound, that could take listeners on a journey. She worked in secret, sometimes staying up long after everyone else had gone to bed, her fingers flying across the keys, guided by intuition and emotion rather than instruction. She experimented with the piano pedals, learning how to make notes linger or fade, how to create tension and release, how to turn silence into part of the music. Her family noticed the change. She would hum little fragments of music at the breakfast table or tap rhythms on the kitchen counter. Her younger siblings would sometimes join in, clapping or tapping along, and she would smile, recognizing that music was beginning to shape the world around her, as much as it shaped her own heart. Her parents, though sometimes concerned she was overworking herself, were proud of her dedication and encouraged her gently, bringing snacks to the piano room or reminding her to rest when she lost track of time. As the day of the school event approached, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. She was ready to play something entirely new, something that no one had heard before. Yet a part of her worried that it might be too much, too different, that the audience might not understand or appreciate her work. Still, she reminded herself of the joy and freedom she had felt while creating the piece, and she knew that was what mattered most. When the performance began, she took her place at the piano. The hall was quiet, filled with students, teachers, and parents. She started with the simple tune she had been asked to play in the past, a nod to the music that had guided her early practice. But soon, almost without thinking, she allowed her fingers to wander. The notes began to stretch and twist, transforming the familiar melody into something rich and complex. She played with confidence, letting each emotion guide her movements. The music grew, layers building upon layers, conveying stories of hope, struggle, and joy. The audience was captivated. They listened intently, some leaning forward, eyes wide, trying to follow the unexpected twists and turns in the music. They could feel the emotions pouring from the piano, the rising excitement, the gentle sadness, the bursts of energy and lightness. The performance was more than just notes and rhythm. It was a journey, a reflection of her inner world, and a demonstration of her growing mastery of the piano. After the final note lingered in the air, the hall was silent for a moment. Then applause erupted, louder and more heartfelt than she had ever experienced. She felt a rush of emotions, relief, joy, and pride, mingling in her chest. Her hands were slightly trembling, but her heart was full. She had shared a piece of herself through her music, and it had been received with warmth and admiration. Teachers and parents approached her afterward, offering praise and encouragement. One of her music instructors, who had been skeptical of her unconventional style at first, admitted that they had been moved by her performance. Another teacher commented on her ability to tell a story through music, something rare for a young musician. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her efforts and creativity were finally being recognized. Back at home, she continued to refine her piece, adding small details and adjusting dynamics, learning how to make each passage even more expressive. She realized that music was a living art, something that could evolve and grow with practice and attention. The piano was no longer just a hobby or a tool for learning. It was a companion, a confidant, and a window into her imagination. During these days, she also began to notice how music affected her own emotions. When she was frustrated or anxious, playing could calm her, help her sort through her thoughts, and bring clarity. When she was happy or inspired, the piano amplified those feelings, creating a sense of joy and fulfillment that no other activity could match. She began to understand that music was not just something to perform for others, but a way to connect with herself, to understand and express her own inner world. She spent countless hours experimenting with different techniques. She tried playing softly with just the tips of her fingers, then striking keys more forcefully to create a dramatic effect. She explored unusual chord progressions and rhythms, sometimes writing them down in her notebook so she could remember them. Each experiment brought new insights, teaching her that creativity was not just about talent, but about curiosity, patience, and willingness to take risks. Her confidence grew as she saw the impact of her music on others. She began to imagine performing in larger venues, sharing her pieces with people who might not even know her personally. This vision gave her motivation, driving her to practice longer and more diligently. She knew that each note, each experiment, each small success was preparing her for the moment when she could fully express her talent to the world. In the quiet of her room, late at night, she would sometimes close her eyes and play pieces from memory, allowing the music to flow naturally without concern for correctness. These sessions were her most cherished moments, when she felt completely free, unbound by rules or expectations. She discovered that these spontaneous explorations often led to her most beautiful ideas, melodies that she would later develop into full pieces. The process was thrilling and humbling, a constant reminder that growth came from both discipline and imagination. One afternoon, she discovered a technique that changed the way she approached her music. She realized that pauses and silences were just as powerful as notes. By leaving space between phrases, she could create tension and anticipation, drawing listeners deeper into her music. She began to experiment with this, learning to control not just what she played, but what she did not play. This insight added a new layer of sophistication to her work, making her music more expressive and engaging. As she continued to develop her skills, she also reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the early days, the simple tunes she was asked to play, the hours of practice, and the moments of doubt and frustration. Each step had been necessary, each lesson shaping her into the musician she was becoming. She understood that her creativity was built on this foundation, and that her ability to transform simple melodies into complex, expressive pieces was the result of persistence, passion, and a willingness to explore. The young musician was beginning to realize that her journey was only just starting. There were endless possibilities to explore, countless ideas to experiment with, and an ever-growing world of music to discover. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities, pushing her to refine her skills and deepen her understanding of her art. She knew that her music had the power to touch people, to tell stories, and to express emotions that could not be spoken aloud, and she was ready to embrace that power fully, one note at a time. Through this process, She also learned the importance of patience and resilience. Some ideas would not work, some pieces would feel incomplete, and sometimes she would grow frustrated with herself. But she came to understand that these moments were part of the creative process, opportunities to learn, adapt, and grow stronger. Each challenge overcame added to her confidence, preparing her for even greater achievements. By the end of this period, she had not only created new music, but also transformed her approach to the piano. She saw herself not just as a student following instructions, but as an artist with a unique voice and vision. She had learned to trust her instincts, to embrace her creativity, and to push the boundaries of what she thought was possible. The piano had become an extension of herself, a means to communicate, to explore, and to inspire. And so, in the quiet moments of her small room, surrounded by the familiar worn furniture and the soft evening light, she continued to play. Each note, each melody, each experiment brought her closer to the music she had always dreamed of creating. Word of her talent began to spread beyond the small school performances. Teachers from nearby schools, local music instructors, and even neighbors started to notice the young musician who could turn simple tunes into breathtaking pieces. Invitations to play at community events and small recitals became more frequent. While the attention was flattering, it also brought new pressures. She was no longer playing just for herself or for her family. There were expectations, and sometimes she felt the weight of them pressing down on her. At first, she welcomed the recognition. She enjoyed performing for larger audiences and seeing the impact of her music on others. People would come up after her performances, praising her skill, the emotion in her playing, and the originality of her pieces. The compliments were warm and genuine, and they encouraged her to continue exploring her creativity. However, as more people began to notice her, she started to feel a subtle tension. She worried about meeting the growing expectations, about whether her next performance would live up to what she had already achieved. The pressure was especially noticeable when she was asked to play at a regional music showcase. This was the biggest audience she had faced so far, with professional musicians and teachers evaluating each performance. She spent days preparing, rehearsing her pieces over and over, making sure every note, every pause, every nuance was perfect. Yet, no matter how much she practiced, there was a quiet fear gnawing at her. The fear that she might not be good enough, that she might falter under the watchful eyes of so many experienced listeners. Her family noticed the tension and offered support. Her parents reminded her that her music was about expression, not perfection, and that she should focus on the joy it brought her rather than the judgment of others. They encouraged her to rest when she needed to take breaks, and to remember why she had fallen in love with the piano in the first place. Their words helped, but she still felt a responsibility to perform well and to prove herself. Despite the pressure, she found that her practice sessions were more intense and focused than ever. She experimented with dynamics, tempo, and phrasing, constantly refining her pieces. She explored new techniques she had read about in music books and added her own ideas, blending traditional methods with her own creativity. Sometimes, she would play the same passage in multiple ways, testing which version conveyed the emotion most effectively. These sessions were exhausting, but also exhilarating, as each discovery brought a deeper understanding of her music and her capabilities. As the showcase approached, she began to realize that her growth was not only technical, but emotional. She understood that music was not just about impressing others or hitting the right notes. It was about telling a story, about conveying feelings that could not be expressed in words. She wanted every listener to feel something when she played, to connect with the music on a personal level. This realization gave her confidence, even as she faced nerves and self-doubt. When the day of the showcase arrived, she entered the performance hall with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The audience was much larger than any she had faced before, filled with people who had come to hear some of the best young musicians in the region. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar pull of the piano keys under her fingers. She reminded herself that this was her music, her story, and that she had the power to shape it with every note. She began with a simple tune, a nod to her beginnings, just as she had in previous performances. But as she played, she allowed herself to explore and expand the melody. Her hands moved with confidence, weaving notes together in patterns that were both unexpected and beautiful. The audience leaned in, captivated by the depth and emotion of her playing. She felt a sense of freedom, a connection with the music that transcended nerves and expectations. After her performance, the applause was overwhelming. People stood and clapped, some moved to tears by the emotion she had conveyed. Teachers and professional musicians approached her, praising her creativity, skill, and ability to transform a simple tune into a complex, moving piece. The recognition was thrilling, but it also reminded her of the growing expectations she would have to meet in the future. She realized that with each success came new challenges, new pressures, and a need to constantly push herself further. Back home, she reflected on the experience. She realized that while recognition was gratifying, the most important thing was her own connection to the music. She wanted to continue exploring, experimenting, and creating pieces that reflected her emotions and ideas. She understood that her journey was not just about performance, but about growth, discovery, and self-expression. The following weeks were a mixture of practice, performances, and self-reflection. She continued to face challenges, moments of self-doubt, the fear of not being good enough, and the temptation to compare herself to others. Yet, she also experienced moments of triumph, creating a melody that perfectly captured a feeling, mastering a difficult passage, or receiving heartfelt praise from someone who truly understood her music. During this time, she also learned the importance of balance. She made time to rest, to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, and to spend time with her family and friends. She realized that her creativity thrived when she was happy and healthy, and that pushing herself too hard could sometimes hinder rather than help her progress. This awareness helped her manage the pressures of recognition and performance, allowing her to maintain her passion and focus. She began to see the value of mentorship as well. Experienced musicians and teachers offered guidance, sharing techniques, insights, and encouragement. She listened carefully, learning not only technical skills, but also the philosophy of music, how to approach it with both discipline and creativity, how to express emotion effectively, and how to connect with an audience. These lessons enriched her understanding and strengthened her confidence, giving her tools to continue developing her unique voice. Despite the challenges, her passion for the piano never waned. Each day, she returned to her room with excitement and curiosity, eager to explore new melodies, refine her pieces, and experiment with her ideas. She found joy in the process itself, in the act of creation, rather than just in the recognition it brought. This attitude allowed her to grow steadily, building both her skill and her confidence. She also discovered that her music could inspire others. Younger students would come to listen, asking questions and trying to emulate her techniques. She found satisfaction in sharing her knowledge and encouraging others to explore their own creativity. She realized that her journey was not only about personal achievement, but also about inspiring others to find their voices and express themselves through music. One evening, after a long day of practice and reflection, she sat at the piano and thought about her journey so far. She remembered the early days of simple tunes, the small recitals, and the quiet moments of discovery in her room. She realized how far she had come, not just in skill, but in understanding herself, her music, and the impact she could have on others. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for her family, mentors, and experiences that had shaped her path. She understood that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more pressures, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that her passion, creativity, and resilience would guide her through. She had learned to trust herself, to embrace her unique voice, and to face challenges with courage and determination. In the quiet of the evening, she began to play a new piece she had been working on, letting her fingers flow naturally across the keys. The music filled the room, carrying with it a mixture of joy, struggle, and hope. Each note was a reflection of her journey, a testament to her growth, and a promise of the music she had yet to create. She played with confidence and freedom, knowing that her story, like her music, was unfolding in its own beautiful and unique way. And so, as recognition and expectations grew, she continued to play, explore, and create. She faced challenges with resilience, embraced her creativity with courage, and allowed her music to evolve into something extraordinary. She understood that her journey was not just about becoming a skilled musician, but about discovering her voice, expressing her emotions, and connecting with others through the universal language of music. With each day, she moved closer to the moment when her true masterpiece would emerge, a reflection of her heart, her soul, and the journey that had brought her to this point. The day finally arrived for the biggest performance of her young career. She had been invited to play at a regional concert hall, a place far larger than any stage she had ever faced. The audience was expected to be full of professional musicians, critics, and passionate music lovers. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach as she approached the grand piano. But beneath it was a deeper feeling, a sense of readiness that had been built through years of practice, exploration, and discovery. She had prepared a piece unlike anything she had performed before. It began with a simple tune, familiar and comforting, the same melody she had been asked to play countless times in her early lessons. But as the music unfolded, she had woven in the layers of emotion, technique, and creativity that she had spent years developing. Every note, every pause, every rise and fall in the music carried her personal touch, telling a story that words could never fully capture. Taking a deep breath, she sat down at the piano. The stage was vast, the lights bright, and the audience silent in anticipation. She let her fingers hover above the keys for a brief moment, feeling the weight of the keys and the power they held to shape sound into something living and meaningful. Then, she began to play. The familiar tune started softly, each note clear and deliberate, anchoring the audience in something recognizable. But soon, she allowed herself to follow her instincts, letting the music expand and transform. Her hands moved with confidence and fluidity, creating textures and patterns that danced across the keys. The simple melody became a canvas, and she painted it with emotion, color, and complexity. Every note told a part of her story. Every chord carried a feeling she wanted to share. The audience was captivated. At first, they listened quietly, curious about how the simple tune would evolve. Then, as the music grew richer and more intricate, they leaned in, drawn into the journey she was leading them on. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound fill them, while others watched her hands in awe, amazed at the skill, precision, and creativity she displayed. The room seemed to disappear, leaving only the music, the piano, and the connection between the performer and the listeners. She felt a deep sense of freedom and joy as she played. Years of practice, moments of doubt, and endless hours of exploration had prepared her for this moment. She was no longer just playing notes. She was communicating, expressing, and connecting in a way that transcended words. The music moved from soft whispers to powerful crescendos, rising and falling with emotion, capturing the audience's attention and imagination. Each section flowed into the next, seamless and alive, a true masterpiece built from a simple beginning. As the final notes lingered and faded, the audience was silent for a brief moment, absorbing the beauty of what they had just experienced. Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then growing into a thunderous ovation. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and some wiping tears from their eyes. The young pianist felt her heart swell with a mixture of relief, pride, and happiness. She had shared her inner world through music, and it had been received with wonder and appreciation. After the performance, she was approached by many people, from fellow musicians to teachers and critics. They praised her creativity, technical skill, and the emotional depth of her music. Some expressed surprise that such a young musician could have achieved such mastery and originality. She listened politely, feeling grateful for their words, but also aware that the true reward had been the act of creating and performing the music itself. She had proven to herself what she was capable of, and that knowledge was invaluable. Returning home that evening, she reflected on her journey. She remembered the days of practicing simple tunes, the long hours of exploration, the small performances in her school, and the quiet moments of discovery in her room. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the doubts she had overcome, and the encouragement of her family and mentors. Each step had been important, building the foundation for the masterpiece she had now shared with the world. She realized that her journey was not just about achieving recognition or perfection, but about understanding herself and expressing her emotions through music. The simple tunes she had once been asked to play were no longer constraints. They were the building blocks for creativity, tools that had taught her discipline, patience, and the value of persistence. Every mistake, every experiment, every moment of practice had contributed to her growth, shaping her into the artist she had become. In the days that followed, she continued to explore new pieces and experiment with different melodies. She knew that her potential was limitless, and that music offered endless possibilities for expression. She took joy in creating, learning, and sharing her work, understanding that each performance was an opportunity to connect with others and to express something unique. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a companion, a source of inspiration, and a way to communicate her deepest thoughts and feelings. Her family and teachers continued to support and encourage her. They understood that her talent was extraordinary, but they also valued the dedication, humility, and passion that she brought to her music. They celebrated her achievements, but also reminded her that growth and learning were ongoing. She embraced this perspective, knowing that each day offered new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to create. As she looked back on her journey, she understood that the true masterpiece was not just the performance itself, but the process of becoming the musician she had always dreamed of being. The countless hours of practice, the moments of frustration and doubt, the quiet discoveries in her room, and the encouragement of those who believed in her all contributed to the richness of her experience. She had learned the value of perseverance, creativity, and self-expression, and she carried these lessons with her in every note she played. The young pianist also began to inspire others. Friends, classmates, and younger students sought her guidance and encouragement. They were drawn to her passion, dedication, and the way she could transform simple melodies into something extraordinary. She shared her insights generously, teaching them to explore, experiment, and express themselves through music. She realized that her journey could have a ripple effect, encouraging others to find their own voices and pursue their passions with courage and creativity. She continued to perform at various events, each time bringing new pieces to life and experimenting with new ideas. Her confidence grew, and so did her understanding of music as a form of storytelling. She learned to listen deeply, not only to the notes she played, but also to the responses of her audience, adjusting her expression and approach to create a meaningful and moving experience. Each performance was a new opportunity to refine her art and connect with others on a profound level. Through all of this, she never forgot the simple tunes that had started her journey. She remembered the first pieces she had been asked to play, the early lessons, and the small recitals that had shaped her understanding of music. These memories reminded her that every great achievement begins with humble beginnings, and that patience, practice, and passion are essential ingredients in any creative journey. In the quiet moments, when she sat alone at the piano, she reflected on her growth. She understood that music was a lifelong journey, one that would continue to challenge and inspire her. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunities she had been given, the mentors who guided her, and the family who supported her every step of the way. She knew that her path as a musician was just beginning, and she looked forward to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And so, with each new day, she continued to play, explore, and create. The piano remained her companion and her voice, a means to express the depth of her emotions and the richness of her imagination. She had learned that even the simplest tune could become a masterpiece when approached with dedication, creativity, and heart. Her journey was a testament to the power of passion, perseverance, and the courage to follow one's own voice. In the end, she understood that music was more than performance. It was a way of life. It was a path to self-discovery, a means of connection, and a source of joy and inspiration. Every note she played, every melody she composed, and every story she told through her music was a reflection of who she was and who she could become. She had transformed simple beginnings into extraordinary achievements, and she knew that her journey, like her music, would continue to unfold in ways that were both beautiful and unexpected.